Welcome to a special edition of the New York Weekly Roundup and the Florida Weekly Roundup. My name is Patrick Michael Megaro. This is part of a series of expert witnesses in which I'm profiling. Today I have the distinct pleasure of sitting down with Dan Doskey of legalgraphicworks.com. They are a media company that specializes in creating audio and visual aids for attorneys for depositions, for case management, for use at trial, for exhibits, that sort of thing. Dan, it's great to have you with us. I know that there's a lot of lawyers out there that would love to use your services and wondering what it's all about. So let's jump right in. I have a few questions.
Sure. So we're a litigation support company. We do work for all kinds of attorneys on all kinds of cases. So we're here today to talk about criminal, but we do civil work, we do contract, whatever anybody needs help with, if they need help to make a better presentation. So whatever that means, anything from medical exams and depositions that we do a lot in the personal injury field, all the way through working as experts on video work, surveillance, video, audio, things like that. So anything that anybody needs, we're equal opportunity workers. We'll do what you need to do across the field.
So I've been saying this for years that jurors have become a lot more tech savvy over the years. People watch YouTube all day long, consume all kinds of content, on-demand content, and we know that there's just about everybody has a surveillance camera in their house now because a lot of people have a Ring. I have a Ring. My wife had to get it. People have surveillance cameras on their homes, on their businesses because they've gotten cheaper. So we're seeing video a lot more come into play in evidence in courtrooms around the country. And I've been saying for a long time that jurors have gotten a lot more visually oriented, and I think the days of trying cases with just a pad and pen and arguing to a jury at the end are probably long gone. I think people want to see some sort of presentation. How do you help trial lawyers with a final presentation to the jury where you marshal all of the evidence together and put it in a timeline or a PowerPoint presentation or a compilation video or audio recording? How do you do that?
Well, our main goal where we start from is we want to take something that may be complicated and turn it into something simple that anybody can understand. But I think you're spot on that people expect a visual presentation now. We used to call it like the CSI effect, but I think that people do, that TV show where, you would see they'd come in with this rock solid evidence that something happened or it didn't happen. But I think that people expect a visual presentation, and I think that a lot of times, especially in the criminal arena, they expect to see that some video evidence was captured of, if it's not the incident itself, some sort of supporting evidence or circumstantial evidence or whatever it is that shows that this person was there or wasn't there. So the visual part of it is absolutely huge, and if you're not doing some kind of visual presentation, I think you're at a disadvantage.
So why don't you take us through a couple of the examples that you've done?
We talked about the one from the barber shop. So I'm going to move forward to kind of the meat and potatoes of this one because there's a lot of setting up who is in what position when. But just to let it, play off the top, you see the exterior of the barbershop, you see how the cars are parked, you see who's, coming in and out. And then as we get into the actual shooting event, you can see where all the participants are, who's who, where they are in the scene. Which was this one? So there's some shots that take place outside, and these two gentlemen flee into the back. Now you can see they're there with essentially nowhere to go, and there's all these rooms in the back of this barbershop. So this person starts shooting. Our client here is the gentleman in the white shirt. You see all those trajectories, you see what's happening, and you see why he would have been firing blind, thinking that somebody was firing at him. And that is what ended up making the difference for the acquittal on self-defense.
So a happy ending. Well, for one person, not for the other. But
Exactly. And then there's a little bit more just following some of the evidence. You see where he dropped his keys going over the fence. And then some conversation between him and one of the employees or barbers there. And then as it goes out, you see a little bit more of an overhead view. And that's what I was talking about, where, you're not going to get this kind of understanding of the scene and the layout from pictures. Somebody might be able to see something and go, okay, I get that. But when you see it from above, when you see it from a different angle, when you see it from the perspective of your client, it makes a difference. And people can put themselves into their shoes.
And this really kind of gives a visual to just the testimony. It's one thing for someone to say it, and it's another thing for someone to say, look on this screen, this is what I'm talking about.
Yes.
This is how it looked to me, and a juror can really now see it through the defendant's eyes. Okay,
Yes.
I can see why that would make a difference.
It doesn't have to be anything, even that complicated. We did a hearing the other day, actually by Zoom, remotely. And it was just deposition testimony, video deposition testimony. But the interesting thing about it was being a little bit removed from the situation, being able to just sit there and watch the judge while we played the evidence. So it was a civil case. When the plaintiff had me play that video, the judge is locked in watching the screen the whole time. Then the defense lawyer comes on. She's reading from her binder. I mean, the judge goes to his computer. He's doing some other work. You know what I mean? Right. But when you give somebody something to look at and say, here, take a look at this and listen, this is important. And all of a sudden it becomes, a TV show isn't the right word, but it becomes an engaging presentation. It makes a difference for people to see something and listen to something. This particular one, our client was in the rear passenger seat of the car and alleged to have shot a person sitting in the front passenger seat of the car. There was blood spatter on the driver's door, which really could not have happened if the driver was in the seat. The state's version of events was the driver was in the seat, your guy got out of the back seat, comes around, fires the gun, through the passenger window and kills this guy. Our client's version of events and what happened was they had all been out drinking and whatever. He was passed out in the back seat. The driver gets out of the car, goes around and kills the person in the front passenger seat, which is why there's blood spatter all over the driver's door, because she wasn't there. If she was in the seat when this happened, there wouldn't have been all this blood spatter all over the door.
It would have been a silhouette, yeah.
Right. So that is the animation on that one, and that also, ended up in an acquittal.
So, in other words, video recreations and creating these visual interpretations or these visual representations of what is alleged to have occurred can not just establish what actually happened, but it can also establish that the prosecution's version is completely incorrect or even expose lies.
Right. It makes it, obvious that it's implausible, impossible, etc. And these things can be used in a couple different ways. Sometimes they're used just as demonstratives in opening or closing, but you can also get, say, a blood spatter expert or a bullet trajectory expert to come in and work with the animator and say, okay, this is what I see, this is what's going to be in my report, or this is what my opinion is, and they can then bring that animation into court and use that as their demonstrative while they're making their point on the stand, which really drives it home. It's not just, what you're saying as the attorney is, this is what I think it is, this is what an expert in this says happened.
You can incorporate the expert's opinions and other independent evidence into these as well. Wow, that sounds very valuable.
This one that we're looking at here is from the Casey Anthony case, which we worked on. Obviously, a lot of people, certainly here in Orlando, are familiar with that case. And this is just a simple kind of timeline, calendar synthesis, talking about a piece of duct tape that was on top of the a gas can that was a piece of evidence. And this duct tape was not your run-of-the-mill duct tape. It was something that wasn't necessarily easy to find. It wasn't carried in a ton of different stores. And part of Casey Anthony's defense was that her father, in some way was involved in the disappearance of Kaylee, or knew more than he was telling. So the reason that this gas can and duct tape is so important is that if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of the graphic, there was a news crew that came out to, I think it was a fundraiser, an awareness thing that George Anthony was doing at a Publix. And in that video, you see the roll of tape on the table where he's sitting, and it's the same brand of duct tape that was on the gas can and that was found with the body. So just the fact that you can establish this was his duct tape, it was found with Kaylee, led to doubt in the jurors' minds. And all of those little things that go together, as you know, are going to help you to reasonable doubt. There's another graphic that is pretty simple, but I think it just drives the point home. And this is a super simple thing, but just talking about burden of proof, all the things that, are not proof beyond a reasonable doubt, right?
Right.
Very simple graphic, but just showing that, look, a strong belief is not enough. This graphic is from the second Aaron Hernandez case, which was a double homicide in Boston, but had ties back to Florida, actually back to West Palm Beach, because there was a gentleman that was with Aaron Hernandez the night the two people were murdered in Boston that was shot with a gun. This graphic shows that the gun tied to the double homicide was never proved to be owned by Aaron Hernandez or anyone that he was involved with. There was a family member of his that owned this gun, and she says, this was not my gun. The gun that you're saying was in the crime was not the gun that I had, was not the gun that, was recovered. They recovered the murder weapon, but they couldn't ever tie it back to Aaron Hernandez. As everybody probably knows, that ended up in his acquittal also,
right.
And then unfortunately he passed away after that. But again, just laying things out in a one page or one screen or one board document so people can follow along. Okay, look, here's this constellation of guns. Here's the gun that was recovered that matched the ballistics to the murder weapon. And here's why it was never tied back to Aaron Hernandez. It wasn't his. So if that's the murder weapon, how is he the murderer? So what this video was done for is to explain the situation of a juvenile offender who committed a horrible crime. He killed two people. But the intended audience was the prosecutor. And we talked about the Supreme Court stance on what's cruel and unusual punishment. We talked about juveniles. We talked about the fact that kids' brains are not an adult brain. And so there's statements from a psychologist who's an expert about juveniles and their sentencing and their penalty phases. There's sound from his grandmother, who admittedly did her best to raise him, but the home situation was not perfect. There's video from the interrogation room of another person who was involved in the crime, but ultimately testified against this 15-year-old and did not serve any significant time in these murders, but more than likely put him up to this and ended up being a father figure to him. And all of these things combined led to a shorter sentence than he was certainly looking at. And although the crime is terrible, a 15-year-old looking at 70 years in prison is pretty tough. I think if anybody has children, they probably would want their child to have a chance at life for a mistake that they made in their teenage years. Certainly with all the mitigating circumstances that this young man went through. So that video was effective, and he will be released from prison sometime in his 40s, I believe. And it's basically just helped soften the heart of the prosecutor. This wasn't a case where, nobody knew who done it. But the video was very effective in, giving this young man a chance to do something productive with his life.
And, that's a whole other aspect that I've been preaching about for years, is sentence mitigation and advocacy in sentencing. Because sometimes you're just trying to work out the best deal for a client, and it looks like a video like this would pack a powerful punch to a prosecutor. And like you said, that's your audience, and you're trying to convince them, or if you're trying to convince a judge at a sentencing hearing, this is why you should go easy on him. Because, and I've said this many, many, many times when I preach to clients to hire experts, it's one thing if Patrick says it. It's another thing entirely if an expert gets up there and gives a presentation and says, this is what I got, because the expert can almost always say it better than I can, because they live and die this material every day, whereas I don't. All I do is quarterback and put it all together. But a video like this, I mean, the defense lawyer is feeding you the material, the raw material, and you're compiling it together to create a compelling storyline that ultimately will hopefully tug at some heartstrings and soften even the hardest heart, I hope.
We talked a lot about video and things like that. This was actually, there was some video editing involved in this, but it was mostly about the sound. And so you may have had a client in this circumstance, but what happened was law enforcement decided it would be a good idea to put these guys together in the back of a patrol car. This was after they had been arrested and everything. I think a few days. See what they say. So certainly, if you have clients in that circumstance, advise them to keep their mouths shut, even if they think that
easier said than done.
It's a private conversation. But we've done work like this for defense clients also. But what you'll see in this and hear in this is that there was a lot of background noise, and the law enforcement was kind of their own worst enemy, I guess, in this case, because as the deputy was driving them, he didn't put his seatbelt on. And so while they're talking, you're hearing bing, 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 bing. So we were actually able to remove all those little dings out of the sound, take those frequencies out to be able to hear what was said. So the original video was really, or the audio is the most important part. So obviously that's a little bit incriminating, but the point is, if there's something that you get that you might think isn't any good or is not of any worth, give somebody a chance, spend a few $100s to look at it, and you might find that there's a lot more to it than you originally thought.
Have you ever had any evidentiary issues with getting these things introduced into evidence? Have you ever had any sort of pushback from judges? And if so, how do you kind of get around that?
So, yes. But generally speaking, it might occur, before trial, because these things are, shared with the other side long before you get to court. But certainly the easiest way to get around it is to say, look, this is a demonstrative exhibit. We're not going to introduce it as evidence, right? So that's the simplest way to get in front of the jury. When you need to authenticate your work along with the expert, typically, that might take place in a hearing, a pretrial hearing or something like that. If there is an objection from the other side, we'll come in and testify and talk about, okay, this is what we did. The expert testifies, this is what I did. I met with them. They, executed my vision, my opinion, and I agree that this is an actual representation of what, my opinion is in the case. That usually solves the problem.
Without getting into real specifics, if somebody wants to hire you privately to do some video review or a recreation or an animation, what can they expect in terms of pricing? Because I know that's, whenever I pitch an expert to a client, that's one of the first questions that comes out is, along with how does this help, which I think we're answering in this video. But aside from that is how much is this going to cost me? Because you mentioned JAC. Not everybody always has the means to pay for it, but if it's money well spent, which I think something like this certainly would be, then I think you'll see a return on investment, so to speak, if we're going to use business language. And that return on investment may be a great outcome in the case, an acquittal, a reduced plea, whatever the case. But what can a person expect in terms of pricing?
Well, I think most people would find, the earlier you get somebody who knows what they're doing involved, probably the less expensive it might get. So right off the bat, when you're starting to get discovery and get evidence and video and things like that in, sometimes people will, get us involved, and the expenditure is minimal, just to look at something or just to, basically maybe clean up a surveillance video or something like that, give you a better look, magnify some of the pieces of that video. Those bills are usually $200 to $400, $500, not a tremendous amount of money. If you find then from that work that there's more to explore with this video, like you did, you talked about in your New York case where literally somebody put your guy into the scene that wasn't there, then obviously, you're going to be spending some more money. I'm sure you spent, thousands of dollars on that case. So it really just depends on how it goes down. But I think that the earlier we get involved, it'll give you a better sense of your case, what
Right.
you have, what's there, or what you don't have. And that makes it easier for you to advise your client and understand how good or bad your case is.
I've been saying for years, get experts in early for that exact reason, but not just for that, so that an expert can guide the attorney and say, okay, listen, these are the kinds of things that you want to be looking for, because I'm not an expert. I didn't go to school for broadcast journalism. I don't know much about TV and video editing. I don't know much about surveillance systems. You do. You know infinitely more about it than I ever will. And I think having an expert to guide the attorney and say, okay, Patrick, this is what you want to go for. See if you can get this, because if you can get this for me, that will help me. That will go a long way, and that will help me in my investigation and my due diligence, which I've been preaching to the choir. And the other thing I've been saying for the longest time is the only thing more expensive than getting an expert is getting an amateur, because it's infinitely easier to prevent a problem from happening than to try and clean up a mess at the last second, which I'm sure you've run across more than once, right?
Yes, quite a few times. I won't say a percentage of clients that do that, but it's a high percentage.
All right. Well, you heard it straight from the source here, Dan Doskey at Legal Graphicworks. Check out their website at legalgraphicworks.com. We're going to post all of the contact information in the description of this video, and I'm going to flash it on the screen right now. If you are an attorney out there, you should definitely hire the services of Dan Doskey and Legal Graphicworks. They will enhance your case like no other, and hopefully you can have the same outcome to your cases. And if you are a client or a family of a client, pay close attention. This is why you hear me say over and over, get an expert, get an expert, get an expert, because experts make results. So Dan, thanks so much for coming in. Love to have you, and I'm looking forward to using your services on the next case.
Thank you, Patrick. It's a pleasure, and we love doing this kind of work. We are passionate about it, so we look forward to helping anybody out there that needs some help with their presentation.
Excellent. Well, with that being said, don't touch that dial. If you like this program, please click that like button, hit that notification bell, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Appeals Law Group. You can also follow us on our Facebook pages. For you Floridians, that's Florida Weekly Roundup. For you New Yorkers, that's New York Weekly Roundup. For everyone else, that's Hall Scott Megaro and Appeals Law Group. You can follow me on Twitter at PMMegaro, and please make sure you visit our website, www.appealslawgroup.com, and check out our blog for the latest developments in Florida, New York, and federal criminal law, criminal appeals, and post-conviction relief.